Hello and welcome to the class. Role of United Nations and protection of women's rights is the topic which we are going to discuss today. Human rights and fundamental freedoms are inherent in the human person, and women and men are entitled to the protection and enjoyment of these rights and freedom on a basis of equality and non-discrimination. Despite the global recognition and support for this principle, women continue to face serious gaps and challenges to the full enjoyment of their human rights. Discrimination against women in law and in practice prevails around the world. As reflected in the persistence of violence against women, women's underrepresentation in public life and decision making, lack of access to education and adequate health services and disadvantages in the labor market, unequal access to land, property and inheritance, and the growing and devastating impact of the HIV/AIDS pandemic on women, stereotypes and traditional and cultural attitudes and practices which constitute discrimination against women exist in all countries, in all parts of the world, and perpetuate women's position of inferiority in the family and in society. Now, let us talk about the UN initiatives. Over the past 6 decades, the United Nations has played a significant role in the promotion and protection of women's rights, including through the progressive elaboration of the substantive content of women's human rights. The United Nations deals with every aspect of human rights of individuals apart from various international issues. It is also interesting to point out that the United Nations had the lead role in putting in practice the global normative standards of equality between women and men and the elimination of discrimination and violence against women and girls. The United Nations provides a forum for debate where critical policy discussions and decision making take place, and it plays an important role in compiling and disseminating information on the status of women generally and on women's enjoyment of their human rights in particular. To mention some of the competent specialized departments and agencies which have been established within the UN to deal specially with issues relating to women are as follows. Commission on the Status of Women, that is CSW. Division for the Advancement of Women, that is DAO. UN Development Fund for Women, that is UNDFW. Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, that is CEDAW. United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. United Nations Population Fund, that is UNPF. Commission on the Status of Women, that is CSW. The CSW is an intergovernmental body that forms part of the Economic and Social Council of the UN, that is ECOSOC. Every year, representatives of member states gather at United Nations headquarters in New York to evaluate progress on gender equality, identify challenges, set global standards, and formulate concrete policies to promote gender equality and the advancement of women worldwide. At each of these meetings, the member states of CSW develop a document called Agreed Conclusions about the priority theme set for that year. The agreed conclusions contain an analysis of the priority theme of concern and a set of concrete recommendations for governments, intergovernmental bodies, NGOs, and other relevant bodies for implementation at the international, national, regional, and local level. The CSW consists of 45 members elected by the ECOSOC for a period of 4 years. Members are nominated by their respective national governments and are elected on the following basis: 13 from African states, 11 from Asian states, 4 from Eastern European states, 9 from Latin American and Caribbean states, and 8 from Western European and other states. Now let us talk about the Division for the Advancement of Women, that is DAO. The DAO is part of the UN Secretariat and specializes in issues concerning the status of women. It is the major part of the UN bureaucracy that advocates for the improvement of the status of women of the world and the achievement of their equality with men. The DAO works with all international conventions and treaties relating to women, including CEDAW and the CEDAW Optional Protocol. The DAO acted as the secretariat for the 4th World Conference on Women held in Beijing, year 1995. This was the largest conference in the history of the UN. The conference was the culmination of 20 years of work by the global women's movement and resulted in the Beijing Platform for Action, that is BPFA. The BPFA is one of the most influential international policy documents regarding women's human rights. The BPFA has been considered one of the most progressive blueprints for achieving gender equality for women. It was negotiated and adopted by the 189 countries that attended the Beijing conference. The BPFA has provided the impetus for major improvements in women's lives around the world. For example, the section on institutional mechanisms provided women in many countries with the legal and international arguments for the establishment of national machinery for women's issues, such as the Federal Office for Women. Now coming to UN Development Fund for Women, that is UNDFW. Commonly known as UNDFW, this specialized agency of the UN works with national governments to promote women's empowerment and gender equality. UNDFW's mandate is based on international women's rights documents, particularly CEDAW and the Beijing Platform for Action. Since its creation in 1976, UNDFW has supported numerous projects and initiatives throughout the developing world that promote the political, economic, and social empowerment of women. These have ranged from small grassroots enterprises that improved working conditions for women to public education campaigns and the design of new gender-sensitive laws, including campaign for marketing. Recent initiatives by UNDFW include funding a project in Cambodia to facilitate handicraft development and upgrade productions and marketing skills of women producers of baskets and clay pottery, and supporting projects in Indonesia, China, and other parts of the Asia-Pacific region to improve the collection of statistics on gender issues. Let us have a discussion on Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that is CEDAW. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, was adopted in 1979 by the UN General Assembly and entered into force on 3rd September 1981. The CEDAW has often been described as an international bill of rights for women. The preamble and 30 articles enshrined in the convention are the key principles of equality and an agenda for national action to end discrimination against women. It is based on the belief that basic human rights include the true equality of men and women. As of November 2008, 185 countries are parties to the CEDAW. The rights enshrined in CEDAW broadly cover many aspects of women's lives, which include political participation, health, education, employment, marriage, family relations, equality before the law, etc. Now coming to United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women. The United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women, also known as UN Women, is a United Nations entity working for the empowerment of women. UN Women became operational in January 2011. Former President of Chile, Michelle Bachelet, was the inaugural executive director, and Pujile Lambunuka is the current executive director of the UN Women. The organization is governed by a multi-tiered intergovernmental governance structure in charge of providing normative and operational policy guidance. The UN General Assembly, Economic and Social Council, and the Commission on the Status of Women, that is CSW, constitute the governance structure that sets forth the normative policy guiding principles of the entity. The intergovernmental governance structure in charge of providing operational policy guidance to UN Women includes the General Assembly, the Economic and Social Council, and the organization's Executive Board. The latter consists of 41 members elected by the Economic and Social Council for a term of 3 years. Now let us talk about the United Nations Population Fund, that is UNPF. In every region of the world, UNPF is working to promote women's rights and end discrimination against them. The fund is increasingly involved in protecting the rights of women affected by conflict and ensuring that women can have an active role in peace building and reconstruction efforts. In many cases, UNPF is able to multiply its effectiveness by supporting legislation that protects the rights of women, such as groundbreaking laws in Ecuador. The fund also supports services for women who are victimized by various forms of gender-based violence. It is also an international development agency that promotes the rights of every woman, man and child to enjoy life, health, equal opportunity, etc. The UNPF supports countries is using population data for making policies and programs to reduce poverty and to ensure every pregnancy is wanted, every birth is safe, everybody is free from HIV/AIDS, and every girl and woman is treated with dignity and respect. Now let us talk about the UN resolutions. The UN General Assembly passed its first resolution on women human rights defenders in December 2013. The resolution is a significant step forward in protecting women human rights defenders who face risk and attacks for their works to promote human rights. In view of the important and legitimate role of women human rights defenders working on development-related issues, it is clear that the agreed conclusions urge states to take practical steps to prevent and address violence against women human rights defenders and integrate a gender perspective into efforts to create a safe and enabling environment for the defense of human rights. Such efforts would be an important recognition of the challenges faced by the women as well as the protective measures undertaken by the global body. The success of observing the 1975 as the International Women's Year led to the decision to celebrate a Women's Decade. The General Assembly designated the years 1976 to 1985 as the United Nations Decade for Women, Equality, Development and Peace. Some of the main goals of the decade were the full observance of gender equality and the elimination of de jure and de facto discrimination. Now we have almost come to the end of today's discussion. Let me conclude that since the first United Nations World Conference on Women in 1975, close collaboration among governments, women's organizations, academia, and other actors has enabled the United Nations to set a strong agenda for gender equality. Much has been achieved in these 60 years, and the gains made clearly show that the goals of equality between women and men and women's empowerment are achievable. However, further progress requires explicit commitment, concerted action, adequate resources, and clear accountability for results. Concerted efforts are needed to close the gap between the international standards, norms, and policies and their implementation at the national level for the benefit of all women and girls. The United Nations further can play an important role in raising the level of awareness for protecting women's rights and to ensure full commitment for enjoyment of their human rights.